So now we will have on the parallel session, GE Healthcare Lean Enterprise Transformation, 6 years of learning and progress. So that will happen in the parallel session. And here on the main stage, I have the chance to have Mark Graban and Luciana Gomes. They will be sharing here on the main stage about psychological safety as the foundation for lean management. So guys, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Thompson. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where you are from. I'm Luciana Gomes from Lean Institute Brazil, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to our guest, Mark Graban. Mark is an author, speaker, consultant, podcaster, and entrepreneur. He's also a Lean Enterprise Institute faculty, a former LEI employee from 2009 to 2011, and an experienced leader using the Lean methodology, change management, and continuous improvement methods in manufacturing, healthcare, and software startups, among other sectors. His latest books is The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation, inspired by one of his podcasts, My Favorite Mistake. In this book, he shows that a winning workplace culture requires a foundation of psychological safety and problem solving, areas in which he's an expert. And in this session, we'll talk a little bit about that. Before Mark starts, I want to inform you that you can send questions using the Q&A during the whole session, and we'll answer all that we can in the 5 final minutes of this session, okay? I hope you can get some insights from this talk, and that this session is just an initial step in your long journey towards a better work environment. Mark, our virtual main stage is all yours. Welcome to the Lean Global Connection. We are very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Luciana. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to everybody who is joining us here today. During the session, there are going to be 3 opportunities for all of you in the audience to participate in live surveys. So please go ahead and scan the QR code that you see on screen there. The QR code will also appear on some of my initial slides. But it would be great, to hear some of your thoughts on what you're experiencing around this topic of psychological safety. In the last couple of years, I've come to believe very strongly that psychological safety really is a critically important foundation for lean, for continuous improvement, and I want to help make that case today. So please go ahead and scan that QR code. It's anonymous, but it would be great to hear what our global audience is experiencing and what you have to say. Okay, so first off, what is psychological safety? Amy Edmondson, professor at Harvard Business School, has written an amazing book called The Fearless Organization. I hope you'll check it out. Psychological safety, as she says, and others in this field define it similarly, psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. This is what we want people to be doing in a lean environment. This is what we would expect to happen in an organization that describes itself as lean or following the Toyota production system. Speaking up about anything. How safe do you feel to do so? That includes how safe do you feel disagreeing with your manager? In some organizations, that might be very dangerous, but in a lean organization, one with high degrees of psychological safety, it's not only safe to speak up or to even disagree, but it's actively rewarded. We look at Toyota, of course, and other organizations that have installed the hardware that gets described as an andon cord. The cord, the lights, the chimes. At Toyota, it's an expectation, it's a cultural norm that if you see a problem, if you suspect a problem, if you've made a mistake, reach up and pull the andon cord. Some factories around the world, unfortunately, install the hardware, but they don't have the culture, they don't have the software, so the cord doesn't get pulled. What a waste. But the andon cord is actually, I think, described as an and-on system. When somebody pulls the cord, the system, the workplace system, the management system, gives a quick, almost immediate response, and a team leader responds in a way that's helpful and constructive.
Hi, Mark. Are you sharing the presentation?
Yes, I thought I was. Maybe that
Because
changed when we got into
yes,
the main.
I think so.
Oh, goodness. Okay, when we got into the main room. But speaking
Yes.
of pulling the and-on cord, thank you. Thank you, Luciana, for doing so. So the QR code for the survey will come up again at a couple of points. So thank you. Thank you for speaking up, Luciana. We did not plan that. That's just a good demonstration of pulling the and-on cord. So the only reference I've found directly until the new book published by Jose Ferro and his co-author, the book Toyota Culture also mentions the psychological safety very directly. Toyota believes people must feel psychologically and physically safe. They must believe that any concerns they have will be taken very seriously. So again, there are two pieces here, not just feeling safe to speak up, but taking those concerns very seriously. So these are the two pieces that are important together. As Luciana said in the introduction, for people to speak up and to continue doing so, we need to have a high degree of psychological safety, plus highly effective problem solving. And a lot of organizations in their lean journey invest a lot of time and effort into problem solving training. But without this sense of psychological safety, people won't point out problems. We can't practice our problem solving on problems that we don't know about. So here's the QR code for the surveys as I talk about what we see here. This is a picture that I took in Japan 5 or 6 years ago. Dr. Yasuda is a chief medical officer at a hospital that happens to be located pretty close to Toyota's world headquarters near Toyota City outside of Nagoya. Dr. Yasuda is smiling because she's showing a chart that shows the impact of some of their culture change efforts over a number of years. The chart, as it's increasing quite dramatically over time, is labeled number of incident reports. I think, well, why would she be smiling if the number of incident reports is going up? It doesn't mean the number of incidents is going up. She's smiling because she realizes more people feel safe to report those incidents. They feel like it's safe and effective to do so. We're closing the gap between the number of incidents and the number of incident reports. If they were being underreported in the past, we want them to be accurately reported so we can then address them. US hospitals, one in the Pacific Northwest, has shared data as they implemented and rolled out a system they called Safety Stop. That was their adaptation of an and-on cord approach. As that was being rolled out and being adopted, you can see there's a big increase in the number of safety stops, root cause analysis opportunities, serious safety events. That's an indicator of psychological safety. The indication that they also had effective problem solving is this next chart, where we see a statistically significant decrease of about 50% pretty quickly in the serious safety events that were occurring. So we have problem reporting, we can follow it up with problem solving. And this combination is not just important for an and-on system and an and-on approach. We can think about what's required for effective catchball in Hoshin planning or whatever else we call it. Effective catchball requires psychological safety. If people aren't speaking up and disagreeing with the goals or the priorities for initiatives, they might be choosing to speak up, or, choosing to keep quiet because they don't feel a high degree of psychological safety. Catchball cannot be just one direction. When we have psychological safety and problem solving of PDSA cycles, we're going to have better catchball. We're going to have better Hoshin planning. What's required for tiered huddles in health systems or other organizations? For people to huddle and share problems with their team, to escalate problems as necessary, for that to be effective and for people to not just go through the motions, we need psychological safety and problem solving. For daily improvement, for learning from mistakes or otherwise, we need psychological safety and problem solving. So again, Amy Edmondson's definition of psychological safety includes the idea that people feel safe pointing out mistakes. So what are mistakes? Like, it's a word we know, it's a word we use. But if we go to a dictionary definition, I think to me this was helpful to revisit this. That mistakes are actions or judgments that turn out to be misguided or wrong. So there are the key 4 words: turn out to be. When we make a decision, we have a judgment or an action, or maybe we decide to not act, we think we're doing the right thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing that. But maybe depending on the situation, after seconds, after minutes, after hours, months, years, we realize that our expected outcome did not happen, that we have an actual outcome that's somewhat worse, and we can identify a gap. And so to me, this reminds me of Toyota's definition of a problem, of a gap between expected and actual. We have a problem with the decision that we made. We can also describe that as a mistake. In the literature about mistakes, especially in healthcare, there's a phrase I've discovered: unintended mistakes. And I'm thinking, like, well, we don't need that modifier. Like, all mistakes are by definition unintended outcomes. If somebody was intentionally doing something bad, we have other words for that. We might call it sabotage or assault. All mistakes are unintended. The phrase honest mistakes, I think, is also not very helpful. All mistakes, we honestly thought we were doing the right thing, and it turns out we did not. So Toyota sets a great example across continents and across decades. Isao Yoshino, who you may know from being the subject and a partner with Katie Anderson on her book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn. Isao Yoshino tells a story in Katie's book. He told it on my podcast. I've retold a version of his story in my book. He started his career in Japan in the 1960s, right out of college. Put him into a production gemba to learn in a paint shop. One day, somebody came running in from downstream and said, we've got like 100 vehicles where the paint is not adhering to the metal. Big problem. The fact of the matter was that Mr. Yoshino had loaded the wrong chemical into the machine, but they didn't blame him for that. It was a systemic problem. They've focused on learning instead of blaming and punishing. David Meyer started his career at Toyota in Kentucky in the 1980s. Very similar situation. Injection molding instead of paint, wrong chemical being loaded. He was not blamed individually for a systemic problem. And last week I was in Japan and I visited 2 different Toyota suppliers who all proactively talked about their culture and how they do not blame individuals for systemic problems. Because when we blame and shame and punish, people learn to hide mistakes instead of being able to move forward with them. So if we think about, and again, here's the QR code for our first survey that's coming up soon. Why would people choose to be quiet? Why would they hide a mistake or cover it up? Why would they not want to speak? It could be, in a lot of cases, due to what we could call a fear factor. People are afraid. They fear being punished, or it's been demonstrated to them that they are going to be punished. So they learn to keep quiet. I always cite Professor Ethan Burris from the University of Texas at Austin, who's done research about the reasons why people choose to stay quiet at work. And if it's not fear, the number one factor is actually what he calls futility. Where I've heard people at hospitals, for example, say very directly, I'm not afraid to speak up. It just isn't worth the effort, right? They might have psychological safety, but the organization doesn't allow them or support them in effective problem solving. So they say, yeah, we know there's problems, but we stopped speaking up. That's the futility factor, and that's sad as well. Okay, so if you're looking at your device, and hopefully the full QR code is not hidden by my video, please go ahead and answer this question based on your experience. What, if anything, keeps you from speaking up at work? Fear, futility, fear and futility, or would you say you have no barriers to speaking up? And I've done this survey with a lot of organizations, a lot of different groups in different countries. And yeah, the results are fairly similar. There's a lot of futility out there. There's also a lot of fear. And thankfully, some people feel like there are no barriers to speaking up. That's the kind of workplace we want to create for everybody. So yeah, thank you for your votes. The votes will continue. You can keep voting until the next question comes up, and Luciana will find a way to try to share the final results with everybody. Okay, so we've got to learn from mistakes. Greg Jacobson, who's the CEO and co-founder at KaiNexus, a software company of about 50 people. It is not a huge organization like Toyota, but Greg believes very deeply, and this is part of the culture at KaiNexus, that you can't have a culture of continuous improvement without learning from mistakes. And our response to mistakes as leaders matters greatly. Are we building psychological safety, or are we making people feel less safe? Some organizations, sadly, have punitive responses to mistakes. People get blamed, people get punished. Maybe they get fired, or worse. Punitive responses harm psychological safety and are counterproductive. People are going to hide their problems. We can't solve them. But some organizations get stuck in the mode of nice, which is just focused on feelings and emotions, where it may be better than being punitive, but leaders say things like, Luciana, don't feel bad. I know you didn't mean to do that. It's not your fault. It's a systemic problem. Please don't feel bad. Well, then that's the end of the discussion, right? So we don't want the systemic problem to remain where we're being nice over and over and over again about the same mistake, because people do feel bad about being involved in a mistake. We need to move forward into what we might call a kind and constructive response of saying, we know it's not your fault, but we're going to learn from this and change the system and prevent future occurrences. To me, that's better to be kind than to be nice. So let's do our second polling question. What's the most likely reaction to mistakes in your workplace? Would you say that it's punitive? Would you say that it's nice? Would you say that it's kind? So we'll see the responses coming in. Now, when we did this survey, an anonymous survey within the team at KaiNexus, again, almost 50 people, that's the first time and the only time I've ever run this survey where nobody said they expected a punitive response to mistakes. That was very encouraging. And I don't think people were afraid to say that they expect a punitive response. It was an anonymous survey. If somebody did say that, we would realize there's a culture problem and a need for improvement. But yeah, this almost bell curve is what I would expect to see. Hopefully there's not a lot of punitive, but sometimes people do get stuck in the mode of nice. Larry Culp, the CEO at GE Aerospace, said this in a publication recently. A problem-solving culture is far more effective operationally than a finger-pointing culture. I think that's a great reminder to focus on learning and improvement and prevention instead of focusing on finger-pointing, blame, and punishment. So how do we engage people? How do we engage them? How do we help them feel safe to be engaged? How do we help people feel safe to speak up? One thing that doesn't work is saying things like, it's safe to speak up here. We're changing the culture. It's not like flipping a light switch. You can't just say, it's now safe. We want you to speak up. Each person decides how safe they feel. Do they feel safe enough to speak up or not. We can't force it. We can't mandate it. So again, please, you could try this, but it might be a mistake to try to mandate psychological safety. In my experience, even me individually, in different workplaces or different teams, sometimes in parallel, how safe do I feel speaking up? It's not an inherent trait that I have or don't have. Speaking up isn't a matter of character or courage. I don't think it should be framed that way. It's a function of culture. If you take the same person, here's the thought experiment that has probably played out in real life. Somebody who's worked a long time on the assembly line at Toyota and feels the psychological safety necessary to pull the andon cord. If they had to move and take a job at another company that didn't have that same culture and they got yelled at for stopping the line, that same person is going to learn to not speak up in that different culture. So please don't blame individuals for not speaking up. Think of it as a cultural challenge. And it's an opportunity. So as leaders at a high level, there's three things that we must do to improve the sense of psychological safety in our team. First is modeling the behaviors we want to see, modeling candor. Greg Jacobson at KaiNexus is so good at saying things like, I was wrong, I don't know, I made a mistake, and I have an idea and I think it's good, but let's test it on a small scale because I'm not all-knowing and infallible, right? So modeling that sort of behavior, I think then gives you the opportunity to encourage your employees to follow your lead and to speak up and to say those same things. I don't know, I was wrong, I made a mistake. And then when they do that, leaders need to very actively reward the candor, not just tolerate it, but reward it. That keeps the cycles and the gears running. So the last thing I want to share, and we're going to do a final survey and do some questions. I also recommend highly Timothy R. Clark's book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. So as leaders are working on these key behaviors, modeling, encouraging, and rewarding candor, speaking up, we're going to move through these 4 stages. So the first is what he calls inclusion safety. Do I feel accepted, included, accepted, and respected? Can I be my authentic self? There's a lot of parallels to respect for people in the Toyota and Lean frameworks. Stage 2, learner safety. Can I learn and grow? Do I feel safe to ask questions, to say, I don't know, to admit a mistake? Stage 3, contributor safety, is basically about contributing and creating value without being micromanaged. And then we can progress to stage 4, they call challenger safety. Can I be candid about change? Can I challenge the status quo? I think that's what we're looking for if we're trying to continuously improve and innovate. But to get to that pinnacle of challenger safety, people, again, must first feel accepted, included, accepted, and respected. There's no shortcutting that. All right, so let's look at our final survey question that kind of goes along those 4 stages. How much do you agree at work, personally, you yourself? 10 would be you agree with the statement very highly. 0 or 1, I think it starts at 1, would mean you don't agree. That first, I feel included, accepted, and respected. Secondly, I feel safe to learn by asking questions and admitting mistakes. I feel able to do my job without being micromanaged. And fourth, I feel safe challenging the status quo and sharing improvement ideas. So Luciana, hopefully, do we see that? It's like the survey did not advance. Let me do that manually. Okay, now that survey question should be up. We're going to just cut into Q&A time briefly. Okay. Technical glitch, a mistake, a problem. I don't know if it was a mistake. It was a problem. Okay, those votes are coming in. And it's interesting to not only look at the averages, but the variation. Because even within the same team, even within the same company, there's bound to be variation where, again, each person decides how safe they feel psychologically. Each person decides how respected they feel based on all of their interactions with leaders and coworkers. So there's no wrong answer to this question. The way you feel about psychological safety is the way you feel. So I would hope people involved in lean organizations would feel strongly about all four of these questions, but that doesn't always happen even in an organization that's very advanced with lean. So Luciana, maybe I can leave this up and running for a minute and we can do Q&A, and then I'll advance to that final slide in a minute or two. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine. We have one question here. Is hello, Mark and Luciana. Throughout the day, I attended 3 sessions talking about daily management. I think that without psychological safety in the organization, daily management does not evolve. What do you think about this?
I agree. Absolutely. It's in that category of lean practices where psychological safety is a necessary foundation. If people think of what's happening in daily management and in huddles, a lot of that involves speaking up about problems, ideas, disagreeing with somebody, that really does require psychological safety. And I'm thinking about, like, I feel safe to admit my mistakes. My first mistake was very visible. I did not. It's funny. I had hit share screen while we were backstage, and then we got into the live session, and I made the mistake of not confirming that my slides were showing, right? And thank you, Luciana, for pulling the andon cord and speaking up. And then that problem about the third survey question, I don't think that was my mistake. If I'd made a mistake, I would admit it. I know I'm blaming a technical glitch, but are there any other questions? Or I know you had some questions, Luciana.
We have another one. Do you think psychological safety can be created and championed across the team without the senior leadership?
Only within certain pockets, right? And this is where within an organization, you're going to have variation in the level of psychological safety within different teams for different reasons. Some of that being due to the behaviors of local leaders. And even within KaiNexus, a software company of 50 people, there's about 4 general high-level teams or parts of the company. And the level of psychological safety was not identical across all 4 areas. It wasn't bad in any of those areas. Now, KaiNexus is a situation where the senior leadership team does very strongly model and encourage and reward these behaviors that are indicative of psychological safety being high. And we've done a survey about that. And KaiNexus is in like the 80th percentile. It's good, but not perfect. But that survey helped us identify a gap, and leaders can continue focusing on that journey. But I think the ideal situation would be having the CEO modeling and encouraging and rewarding behaviors, because to some extent, it all flows down from there. Sometimes, and this is true about lean culture, leaders at the director or vice president level might be doing all of those right things, and then they're shielding their team from those senior leaders who don't share the same values or have those same behaviors. But I think certainly the ideal state would be senior leadership driving this. And then I brought the poll back up again, as we have about a minute left. That variation in this broad, diverse global audience. Unfortunately, there are some people in the room, who answered 1 or 3 or 4 out of 10 to those 4 questions. So it's always sad to see, but hopefully they can either help improve their culture or maybe find themselves in a workplace that does have higher levels of psychological safety.
Mark, Luciana,
Christopher.
as we thought, we needed more time, right?
No, I think we ended right. I think we ended right on time. I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, guys. We will continue here. So please go to the lobby, share with people that are there. They want to talk to you. And thank you again.